Today we're going to be having a look at how you can build the best board for you. This is my baby that I built during the lockdown and it's been absolutely amazing so far. We're going to be having a look at how to design your wall, how to build your wall, how to set up your holds, how to buy your holds, all of that great stuff. So stay tuned for what's next. So before you start doing anything, you have to have a good design in place. You need to know your space available. You need to know whether or not it's going to be a freestanding board, whether it's going to be a fixed board, whether it's going to be steep, like 55 or 45, how high your ceilings are, all that sort of stuff. This board is completely freestanding. It's not fixed to anything on the back, and the reason for that is we didn't have anything to fix it to. It needed to be freestanding. So the benefits of having a freestanding board over a fixed board is that you really can move it anywhere you want. This board, it took 3 days to build, but it only takes about a day to take apart, move, and then rebuild it. So for that respect, you know, it's actually really decent having a freestanding board. A fixed board is great if you're living somewhere permanently and you've got the fixings behind and the structure in the wall to be able to do that. It also means that you're not going to have these big legs in the way. Now, when I built the board, I was a bit worried that the legs were going to get in the way of climbing. And actually, since I've kind of gotten used to it, it doesn't actually affect anything that badly. You're going to be restricted in height depending on the space you've got available. We had a lot of space in height, but we chose to keep it very small, as I said, because I wanted it to be more bouldery. But you can go for longer boards. Personally, I wouldn't have gone for anything shorter than this, and I'm about 6 foot, you know, so it's probably about a good 8 foot tall, really, 8 or 9 foot anyway. And this to me is pretty much perfect. If you have a much higher board, the pros of it are you can go for longer, you can do more powerful moves. However, you are going to fall further, and if you don't have the matting for it, then you can quite a sore landing. If you're going to be training endurance on the board, I would try and go for a wider board if possible. So obviously matting is a huge thing for your personal safety. And as you can see, I have like a nice big 300mm piece of foam here that was a reject from a climbing wall that recently closed down in Edinburgh, which I was really lucky to get a hold of. But other than that, I've got 2 bouldering mats, normal standard bouldering mats for climbing outside up front. That's kind of okay. As you kind of come further back and you're falling further, it might be nice to stack up on bouldering mats if you don't have a big piece of foam. These pieces of foam, you pay full whack for them, are really expensive. So I'd advise just getting loads of outdoor mats, maybe even an old bed mattress if you have one. So I think it's important to know what angle you want for your board. And obviously there's going to be certain restrictions that are going to force you into making a certain angle. For example, if you've got a low ceiling, to get more length out of the board, you might want to have it steeper. I generally think the best angles for training on a board are between 30 degrees and 55 degrees. I think 30-35 degrees is a really good angle for training endurance on. The reason for this is the holds can be smaller, it's still steep, so it's still getting, you know, right in your arms and your forearms. But also the holds aren't going to be too big. Unfortunately, for training bouldering, when it's 30-35 degrees, you have to pull on some pretty small crimps to start making it hard. And so that starts, you know, eating into your skin, which you don't really want to do. I think 45 degrees is a really good angle for kind of training endurance and bouldering. It means that the holds aren't going to be too good for training endurance, but it means that you can also have really bad small holds for training bouldering. And then I think if you've got a low ceiling and you can't get the length of a 45 degree board, sometimes a 55 degree board is the best option. I do think that 55 degrees is too steep to train endurance properly. I mean, how many long routes do you climb that are 55 degrees and sustained at that? Not many. And also it trains the core in a really good way. And for bouldering on those 55 degree angle boards, it's good, but again, you end up pulling on bigger holds than you really want to be training on. And for that reason, I would recommend trying to nail that 40-45 degree mark if you can. And then if you can have both, get a 30-degree board and a 40-degree board. Perfect. If you can have all three, get a 55-degree board as well. But if you're limited, 45 degrees is the best. Building it yourself is without a doubt the cheapest option. This cost me £200 to build, which in the great scheme of things is absolutely nothing. Is it hard to build a board? I mean, it is actually a little bit time consuming. It took us 3 days to build this, but I have absolutely no experience with DIY. I'm rubbish with my hands. And you know, we took our time when we built this, and I think it turned out really well. We just followed an online video that already existed. I'll put the link in this video actually for you to have a look at that one. It was a really simple design. We went online, bought all the materials, it was really cheap, and as long as you take your time with it, it's absolutely fine. So what kind of holes do you have? I mean, you've got crimps, pinches, pockets, slopers, volumes, you've got macro features, you've got wooden holes, you've got plastic holes. There's tons of holes to choose from. So which holes do we actually want for the board and why? I have a really good selection of holes on my board. I have a mix of wood and plastic holes. Most of my plastic holes are pretty old school. They're actually mostly rejects from the climbing wall, which I got, you know, either cheap or completely for free. But should you get wood or plastic? Now, I would say it's good to have a good mix of both. I see a lot of boards out there that are only wood holes, and I kind of think, you know, they're missing the trick, because plastic's also really nice as well. But plastic does have a good bit of friction that the wood doesn't have, which can make it quite nice for footholds as well as training on. The benefit of wood is that there's no friction on it, so it's harder to hold, but it's also going to be much friendlier on the skin. So honestly, I would recommend a selection of both, irrespective of what you're using your board for, but especially if you're using your board for training endurance, because in my experience, training endurance on plastic holds is way easier than training purely on the wooden ones. The wooden ones just have so little friction that when you're trying to rest or you're trying to power through a pumpy section on a circuit, you kind of do want to be getting some friction through your fingers. You can get budget holds or you can get really, really expensive holds. Well, honestly, mostly the difference between the budget ones and the expensive ones is kind of like how fancy they are, like how the shapes are. And I'll be dead honest, the more expensive holds, the fancier holds, I think they're honestly mostly wasted on a board. You don't need anything too fancy, you just need basic shapes that are gonna do the job. In the wooden hold selections, you'll also get a range of prices, and I think for the most part they tend to be on the lower end of the price scale compared to plastic holds. So having a really good selection of holds on your board is really important, but how many do you actually need? That's quite a difficult question to answer. As you can see, I have more holds than I can possibly put on my board, but that's after years and years of collecting them. But that's the thing, guys, you know, you kind of can just collect holds and fill in the gaps as you go along. I think from the get-go, it's really important to get a number of holds in all the different grip types you need. But then, you know, 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, you can buy a few more sets and add to your collection. So it's not a case of just having a number, it's just having, you know, enough that you can train everything you want to train on. So there's obviously quite a few common mistakes people have when they're buying holds first time for their board. I guess one common mistake that I see all the time is people just littering their board with pinches and not getting much else. The obvious thing I see with a lot of climbing holds is that they have quite a high profile coming out from the wall, which makes most holds, even if you think they're a crimp, turns them into a kind of a pinch instead. So I think one of the key things early on is making sure you get some dedicated crimps as well as pinches. Crimps that you can't do anything else but full crimp them. Also, making sure you have lots of holds in different varieties. So you got your crimps, you got your pinches, but also get some pockets, because you need to train pockets. And if you come across to a pocket outside or on a problem indoors, then you're more likely to get injured on it than if you haven't trained on them on your board. I also think a lot of people buying really big holds for their board, and that is another mistake because big holds take up a lot of room, and that means you're going to have less space for putting other holds on the wall. Do volumes have a place on boards? In my honest opinion, unless it's a very small volume for sticking a couple of crimps on, they don't have a place. A volume will just take up loads of room on that board, it'll get in the way, it'll just be an absolute nightmare. So what holds you have on your board will be chosen largely for what you're training for. You know, are you training for outdoors? Are you training for indoor competitions? Or are you training for bouldering? Or are you training for routes? And that actually has a huge effect on it. If you're training for indoors or climbing competitions, then you might actually want quite a number of slopers to train on. Whereas if you're training for outdoors and smaller holds, you probably won't want as many big slopers and macro features. If you're training for endurance, you're definitely going to want to have lots of really quite positive holds all over the board, and I would choose some really good quality, comfortable sets in a base color that you can set a circuit with. Basically, the best way to do that is to have a guesstimate how many moves a circuit is going to be round the board, and buy that plus another 5 just in case. And it's a really good idea to get some specific footholds that are small, slopey, things that you can't really use for your hands, so they're specific footholds for your board. So I actually think there's a really nice process you can take for setting a board that means you can have some fun with it, it's creative, but it's also going to create a really functional board. So the first thing I do when setting a board, when it's blank canvas and you've just got everything to go, is actually setting some problems in like a fixed color. So actually this one here, this olive colored one, was the first problem that I set on the board, and it's just a really good fun problem, and it's always there and I can always go to it. It's actually one of my warm-ups now, and the cool thing about it is Culann still can't do it. But the next stage I would do is get any really large, big holds that you're going to put on the wall, any big slopers, because you kind of want to put those on the wall so that you've got the space to put them in the right place. As soon as you start filling in all the gaps, the smaller holds, you're going to lose that space quickly. The next thing I do is I set a circuit. So if I'm going to train endurance on this, I might set one or two circuits that go around the wall in a base color, if I can. And the reason for that is, again, I just want to have lots of positive holds all around the board. And lastly, to get all the rest of the holds on the board, what I would suggest is kind of looking at the wall a bit like a grid. Split it up into sections, to squares, and then taking each small square and trying to make sure that in every square there's an undercut, in every square there's a gas on, in every square there's a jug, in every square there's a crimp, in every square there's a pinch, in every square there's a pocket, and just kind of trying to fill it up like that. That way in every section of the board you know you have an undercut, you know you have a pinch, you know you have all the holds that you need to set good problems. And the beauty of having your own board and being your own setter is that you can change this whenever you want. What I would really advise doing is once you've set the board, give yourself 2 to 3 weeks of climbing on it every day and then seeing what holds you use. And after that period, if you don't use some holds, it'll be dead obvious because they won't have any chalk on them. Ask yourself why. Is it because they're in the wrong position? Is it because there's nothing really going to it? And if you want, move that hold, replace it, put it somewhere else. And then after about a month of climbing on it, I would say try and keep your board fixed for probably anywhere between 6 and 12 months. I think the 6-month marker is a good time to have a reassessment of the board. Is it working in the way you want it? Is there anything you can do to make it better? But I would generally keep my board fixed for the entire 12-month period because you do need a long time to build a good library of problems that are going to be great for training in a number of styles. Setting problems on a board is without a doubt the most fun you can have on it. And there's lots of inspiration you can take from it. You know, you can go online watching climbing videos to get some inspiration from outdoors or indoor climbing gyms. I take a lot of inspiration from projects that actually exist that I am working on, and so I create replicas on the board. The other thing that's important to do is to like isolate weaknesses. So if you know that you're particularly bad on Gastons, make sure to set plenty of Gaston problems. If you know you're bad on pockets, make sure to work your pocket problems, you know? Just try and take inspiration from lots of different sources and try and keep it varied. And I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Hope you got plenty of tips for your own board at home. If you've got any more questions, fire them down below in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And obviously, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and ding that wee bell for notifications on when the next video is out. Peace.